All right, hello and welcome to the I Make America Town Hall Tour. It was a little bit more than I expected, but I tell you, we are so pleased to host this. The Association of Equipment Manufacturers, better known by most of us as AEM, we're happy to have you here today at Genie, the headquarters for the Terex AWP segment. AEM. You know, a lot of you are familiar with AEM, some more than others. I was talking to them, we went to dinner last night, and they were telling me they've been around for coming up on 125 years. I'm like, doing the quick math, I'm like, 125 years? So they started in ag, but they've been a huge part of our industry. And they're a group who represents our voice in Washington, D.C., as well as being our advocate for equipment manufacturing industry in general, and representing us in the global marketplace. Today, they're here to lead a discussion about the role of trade and trade policies to the future growth and success of the construction industry. Pretty important and hot topic, you know, as you look at the way this year has unfolded. To give you some context around the importance of today's events, I'm sure a lot of you are looking at, you know, the 2018 midterm elections. They're shaping up to be very critical, and it's perhaps even more important than ever that we pay close attention to the policies that impact our business and our company. This is the reason that we partnered with AEM for this event, and it's the third time that they've done an I Make America tour, so really glad to have them here. The other thing that I think that, you know, some of the people in the audience, you know this very well, others may not. We make aerial work platforms around the world. The pictures on the back here is of boom lifts, got one on either side. Genie's going to make about 20,000 of these this year. So today, we'll make about 100. Okay, we're making those machines in the US, we're making them in Italy, and we're making them in China. There's thousands of pounds of steel in those machines. There's pumps, there's engines, there's cylinders, there's things that come from all over the world. So we are right smack in the middle of the trade and the impact that it has on the business. Because Terex competes in a global marketplace where policies and other external factors impact our businesses, as well as the suppliers and our customers. Okay? They're all being impacted by it. So it's really important that we pay attention. And it's important that we help move a pro-trade agenda. And it's important that America reclaim a position as a global trade leader. During today's discussion, AEM has invited some excellent industry experts, one of which is our own John Garrison, Chairman and CEO. And they're going to discuss how trade has helped strengthen our economy and how it's created thousands of manufacturing jobs. It's important that we're all informed and engaged on this topic. But before we dive into these discussions, we're going to watch a short video to learn more about why AEM and the I Make America Town Hall event is here today. And so I'll turn it over to the video.
We're the people who make America. Every day, Washington is making decisions that impact the future of our industry, our jobs, our companies, and our communities. Decisions about farm policy, infrastructure investment, and trade. These decisions matter to us, the 1.3 million men and women of the equipment manufacturing industry. We need Washington to champion policies that help build strong and prosperous agriculture communities, reclaim our infrastructure advantage, and promote free and fair trade that drives demand for our products. But none of this will happen without us. So let's get informed. Let's get engaged. Let's make our voices heard. Let's get to work.
Hello, good morning, everybody. How are you? We're going to fix that. My name is Steve Patterson. I am thrilled to be here. Welcome to the third I Make America Town Hall Tour event of 2018. I've been a part of all three of them. It's so much fun. Now, my background, I know many of you just don't know who I am. I'm a TV and radio host from Minneapolis, St. Paul, and I am here to make sure that everybody acts like a television studio audience today. Are you ready? So, here's what we're going to do. I know we're talking about trade, but I'm going to make sure emotionally we're stable. Let me hear your big TV audience, ooh. Goodness, we could be an a cappella choir. All right, now let me hear your ah. Oh my gosh. Wow, you guys really sound great. All right, and here's the third and most important. We need to keep our energy up today. We're going to have fun. We're going to learn a lot. And this is what we do with our television studio audiences that we have. I'm going to count down 3, 2, 1. You are going to applaud, and you're going to applaud very loudly. I did not just tap in for par. You're going to be excited. Do you feel me? Here we go. 3, 2, 1. Let me hear you. Come on. All right. So we're going to keep that energy up all morning long, a really fabulous event. Now, as a TV and radio host, I do get to talk to people all the time about things that are very important to them in the communities where they live. It's really a lot of fun, but today's conversation is going to be special. We are here to talk about something that, as you all know, is critically important, not only to folks here in the great state of Washington, but to people all across the country. We're here to talk about trade, and specifically how important trade is to the equipment manufacturing industry. Equipment manufacturers of all sizes and sectors, you know this, rely on international trade to find new customers, to grow jobs domestically, and to improve our country's competitiveness in an increasingly interconnected world. Now, as you heard in the great video that got us started, all of you who are a part of the equipment manufacturing industry, and I mean all of you here in the room, and in case you didn't know, there are likely thousands that are watching via live stream as well, you all have a role in supporting American trade. You do that how? By producing cutting-edge equipment, some of which we even have in the room with us, and then of course, this gets exported all around the globe. Now more than ever, it is important that Congress and the administration provides pro-growth trade policies to keep the U.S. equipment manufacturing sector strong and to keep workers employed. I think that's something that just about everybody can rally around. Now, as an industry, you need to help advocate for trade policies that grow your industry, invest in the overall economy, and create jobs. So today we're going to dig deeper into some of the programs and some of the policies as well that help to support a strong trade economy. Now, just so you know, this is not just going to be one way. We want this to be a conversation. There will be times that I will ask you to participate, and you've already proven that you're team players. You sounded great. At certain times, I will ask you to pick up, see those little clickers that you got? Everybody grab your clicker, and at various points, I will ask you how you feel about a given topic. So why don't we test the technology and see if it works? All of the questions will be multiple choice, very easy. You just hit 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5. Don't be shy. Let's see if we can get everybody to participate. Why don't we do a test run? What are you most proud of being associated with Seattle? Let's start the timer. Option 1, Grey's Anatomy, Starbucks, Nirvana, the Seahawks, or all of them. We got 10 seconds. We're watching there, seeing how many of you are participating. Let's see if we can get to full capacity, and then we will reveal the answers. 2 seconds left. 1 second. The answers are in, and survey says, aha, Seahawks. And while I appreciate that, very technically, that was incorrect. The correct answer was all of them. We love it all. It's great. Although Grey's Anatomy is in its 13th season, so maybe it's time we pull it out. Who cares? We'll talk about that later. Okay, so now you know how the clickers work. We would love for you to be involved all throughout the morning. To start off, I want to invite up a fabulous group of panelists that we have. John Garrison, who worked out this morning and every morning, if you didn't know that. Fred Hochberg and Anja Manuel to join me up on stage. Come on up, guys. Now, these folks are great. They know, I mean, they are truly experts in their field. They have a lot of valuable information to share with you today, and they're a lot of fun. So we're going to have a good time here.
I didn't work out this morning. I'm feeling really...
Neither did I.
Yeah, listen, nobody
Nor
else,
did our host.
I didn't either. I had dinner with John last night. He said I should work out this morning, and I didn't. And he shamed me. John, let's start with you. I know a lot of folks here in the room, of course, know you, but talk a little bit about your background and how trade impacts the work that you do at Terex.
Well, thanks, team. I'm John Garrison, as you know, Chairman and CEO of Terex. It's great to be here. I've been here a couple days. We've had a great 2 days doing our talent review. I had a chance to be here a couple weeks ago, and what gets me excited is all of you, great team members. And if you think about what our incredible machines do around the world, our customers do amazing things that help the world become a better place. And that's our purpose, and that's what you all do day in and day out. I also have an incredible fun job because I get a chance to go out and see all of you. And Matt's sitting there. The last time Matt and I were on the camera was when we were 180 feet in the air on the SX-180. And for the inside story, the first time we failed. We only went up 170 feet. We came down. We said, why'd you only come down? Why didn't you go all the way to 180? So Matt, thank you. We made it to the top. But on trade, why does that matter? I bring that example up. Our large booms, 50% of what we produce on our large booms are exported around the world. That's an incredibly important product for us. Trade is incredibly important for us as a global manufacturer. We sell around the world, we manufacture around the world. We need a world with open and free trade, because if we have that world, I'm absolutely confident that we can compete and win in that type of environment. So trade is essential to the success of Terex.
All right, Fred, now we will turn to you. Trade has obviously had a really big role in your career. Why don't you talk to our friends here today a little bit about your role as the chairman and president of the Export-Import Bank and the kind of work that you were doing there?
So the Export-Import Bank of the United States is about 80, 85 years old. Almost every country in the world, there are about 90 of them around the world, close to 100, have a export finance organization. That's what we did, to finance U.S. exports. So if Terex or Genie is exporting to some countries where they need to finance that equipment and local financing isn't available, we want to make sure that American workers and American companies get those sales. So we will provide the financing at, I will say, at a profit. We actually make a profit. And I served for 8 years as chairman of Ex-Im Bank, and over that period of time, we delivered $3.8 billion worth of profits to you, the taxpayers, each year from the excess we were able to make on that lending portfolio.
We will tap into Fred's expertise here in just a bit. Anja, we now turn to you. Obviously, you have a lot going on these days. Why don't you tell us a little bit about your background in trade and trade policies?
Sure. I'm very happy to be here with all of you this morning. I used to work at the U.S. State Department, where I negotiated with countries like China and India and others. I'm now business partners with Condoleezza Rice and Bob Gates, straight from Seattle, a great Seattle native. And we help U.S. companies export and navigate this sometimes crazy world that we live in. But most importantly, I grew up in a small blue-collar town in Germany where by far the largest employer was an equipment manufacturer, like Genie. And I remember when the exports dried up, the factory shut down, and it was incredibly traumatic. So I feel like I come from a world where manufacturing is incredibly important and have seen firsthand the importance of trade to keeping that vibrant.
All right, very good. Now that we know a little bit more about our three panelists here today, let's dive deeper into three important issues, all of which are related to trade. First, we're going to talk about the importance of trade to the equipment manufacturing industry and how and why equipment manufacturers need access to new markets. Then we will discuss the government's role in promoting trade and helping U.S. companies grow through access to new markets. Finally, we will discuss the biggest challenges to the future of trade, obviously very relevant and topical this day and age, and what that means for the United States. Now, these folks up here, as I mentioned, are truly high-caliber experts in their field, but this is a dialogue, so do stay on your toes. We will try and get at least one question in, maybe two after we hit each topic. So if something comes to your mind, don't be afraid to shoot your hand up. This is an awesome opportunity for you to have your question answered by one of our fabulous panelists here today. John, we'll start with you. You guys at Terex obviously know better than anybody that trade policies that are created in Washington, D.C. directly impact the equipment manufacturing sector's ability to sell their products both here and abroad. Now, we will hear you talk a little bit about the decisions that are being made right now in the nation's capital, how those are impacting the overall health of the manufacturing industry. But before we do that, clickers up, ladies and gentlemen. Here we go. First quiz question of the morning. Let's test your knowledge about this topic. And it reads, tell us how much of a boost in purchasing power you think the average American household gets thanks to free trade agreements. We'll put the timer up. Get your answers in. See some people standing. This is exciting. They want to get a better look. We've got none. Less than 5,000, 5 to 10,000, 10 to 15, or 15 to 20,000. Those are your options. Let's see what the room said. Alrighty, we've got it right there in the middle, $5,000 to $10,000 per year. The correct answer, actually all the way down at the bottom, $15,000 to $20,000 per year. Very specifically, that answer is $18,000 per year. And just think about that. That is a lot of money. Think about what you can buy with $18,000. Now, interestingly, AEM recently conducted a survey among Washingtonians and asked this very question. Most people in the state of Washington said that they either didn't know or they thought it was likely less than $5,000. So, John, we have now established that these trade relationships have an actual impact on American families. Can you talk to us a little bit about why these relationships matter so much to the equipment manufacturing industry and companies like Terex?
Sure, and team, part of the reason we're doing this and why we volunteered to do this was to help educate, because unfortunately trade is misunderstood a great deal. And you know, the narrative around trade is you drive by a plant, the plant's been closed down, and somebody says that's what trade's about. And on your way to Costco, as you drive by the plant, you get to Costco and you purchase goods and services, and you don't realize that without free trade, you would not be able to purchase those goods and services at the price that you do. So trade is incredibly important. If you think about us, about 85% of what we make at Terex in the United States, we sell in the United States. But the other way to look at it is, what do we export? 25% of what we manufacture in the United States, we export abroad. Think about that. Why is that important? We're a capital-intensive good. We need those open markets to be able to sell our goods, to generate the cash and the profits we need to invest back into the business. Think about what it was like here in 15 and 16 when we lost 25% of our revenue in the difficult decisions that you all had to make in that environment if we didn't have access to those export markets for that 25% of our sales. So trade is incredibly important for us globally in sales, not just in the United States, but from the EU, from China. Exports matter from where we produce. We're a global manufacturer. The other thing that's important around trade is our supply chain. About 80% of what we manufacture or what we use in our machines here in the United States, we source from US-based companies. 20% we import. Without that 20%, we wouldn't be in a cost competitive position to compete in these hyper-competitive global markets that we have to compete in globally. So our supply chains are incredibly important, as you all well know. I got my supply chain teams here. Thousands of suppliers all over the world, millions of different parts that we have to deal with day in and day out. So the integration of the supply chain is incredibly important. And finally, trade and trade policy matters. And you're going to hear it from Fred and Anja. I am not the expert. They're the experts. All right? But you're going to hear why it matters. But let me give you a very clear example. We've talked about the 232 tariffs and the imposition of tariffs on imported steel. As a result of that action, we have seen our steel costs go up 50 to 60% since this time last year. Compare that to what the European manufacturers saw, 6 to 8 to 10% increase in steel. Look around. As Matt said, we've got a lot of steel in our products. So our costs have gone up dramatically, our suppliers' costs have gone up dramatically, and then we're left with, what do we have to do? Well, we said, listen to our customers, it's not our issue, I mean, it's our issue, but it's not our fault, and we tried to pass a price increase on. And we were successful in some cases, but we had several customers that said, no, I'm not paying that steel surcharge. And what did they do? They went to competitors in from the EU and competitors from Canada, and they took business that we otherwise would have had it not been for us raising the price as a result of the dramatic increase in the tariff. So that's an example of where government policy has an adverse implication on us. Now, speaking on the AEM side, because I speak on, for the AEM as well, the steel industry supports 140 or 150,000 employees. Downstream from that people that use steel in manufacturing is 6.5 million people. We're in that stream. And so for 150,000, we're adversely impacting 6.5 million. And we're fortunate because we've got some great supply chain people. We've got some people that can do some things flexibility-wise to help us offset that. If you're a small manufacturer and your only source is U.S. steel and you don't have a supply chain team to go help you out, you're eating that cost with perhaps not the ability to pass that on to the customer. So there's an example of where trade and trade policy really matters and has definitely impacted us this year, and it's continuing to impact us as we go forward. So I think there's an example of trade and why trade policy impacts a manufacturer like Terex.
There's a lot of good stuff there, Fred. Anja, anything that you would add to what John said?
Well, I think that what is really not well understood, I mean, you brought up a great slide in terms of how much Americans save due to trade. And the fact is we have more purchasing power. We spend less money on things like food and disposable clothing and things like that than we did 20, 30 years ago. Regrettably, we spend more on things like healthcare and housing, but thankfully we spend less on that. So that's the advantage of trade. And I think what John brings up is we don't often understand this whole idea of supply chain. It sounds obvious, but it's not that clear. The fact is, to make the best products here at Terex, or if you're driving a Ford or a GM car, you're assembling products from all over the world to make the best product at the best price. And I think that's an advantage we've seen from global trade and free trade that is often overlooked.
Anja, anything you would add?
I would just add one last point. John and Fred were exactly right. Import-export is one unified system. Right? This isn't, I worked on the California Governor's Export Council, and we were always talking about how do you get California companies to export more. Well, that only happens if you can easily import the supplies that you need in order to manufacture products. And secondly, this is a two-way street. So when we impose huge tariffs, guess what? The rest of the world will impose them too. It's not a one-way thing. So we are going to be shooting ourselves in the foot by having increased tariffs that then will come back in equal form.
All right, we've got a moment here. Again, if you have a question for our panelists, you can slip your hand up right now, and we will try and get a microphone to you. We have Becky is our microphone runner. There's Becky over there. So if you feel like you have a question, okay, we got one right here. And if you can introduce yourself, tell us what you do here, and then ask your question.
Okay, my name is Vivek Karpuswamy. I work in human resources. The question is for John. When you look forward for 3 to 5 years from now, what do you think is the biggest trade opportunities for Genie?
For Genie specifically, Vivek, I think if we look out 3 to 5 years today and 3 to 5 years into the future, really the China market is a big market. We've got a very successful business right now in China and the growth in the China market. We hardly do anything right now in India, and I think India is really getting ready to take off for our types of products. So I think the Indian market is a strong export market. We need to continue the strength that we have in and out of the EU because we import and export out of, as Anja said, we import and export out of the EU. So that's going to continue to be an incredibly important market for us. And then we'll see what happens in South America, specifically Brazil. Brazil's in a pretty tough place. Years ago it was a very good market for us. Today, not as much given the political turmoil that's ongoing. So as I look out, I think that those are the markets that we have opportunity in today and going forward, Vivek.
Anybody else have any questions? You can slip your hand up. We'll get a microphone over to you quickly. Want to make sure that I don't overlook anybody. I know we're putting you on the spot. Can take a little boldness. All right, if any questions pop up as we go on, we'll have a couple more opportunities. So now we have established that in order for companies like Terex to keep producing all of the great equipment that we quite literally see around us here today, it's needed that there should be smart pro-growth trade policies in place. Fred, we will now shift to you. Now that we know a little bit more about why federal trade policies are important to this industry specifically, I want to talk to you about the government's role in promoting trade and helping U.S. companies grow through new markets. But before we talk with you, let me talk with you. Grab those clickers. If you're watching on the live stream, you can play along there. Time to ask your question. Okay, how many American jobs do you think are supported by trade? Let's start our timer and go. Option 1, 5 million. 2 is 10 million. 3 is 25 million. Option 4, 40 million. And option 5 is 100 million. How many American jobs do you think are supported by trade? We've got just a few seconds. We will tally the responses of the room. Survey says, all right, we had a guess down here. I like how you're thinking. Number 5, 100 million. The actual answer, number 4, 40 million. That's okay. We grade on a curve. You'll do fine. The answer is 40 million. Over 20% of manufacturing jobs in the U.S. depend on exports. Now, when AEM asked people right here in the state of Washington what they found most worrisome when it comes to the current administration's tariffs on imported goods, they said it was the increased cost of everyday goods as well as potentially damaged relationships with U.S. allies. Fred, this is obviously very important stuff, especially to the folks in the room here and watching on the live stream. Talk to us a little bit about the role that the federal government plays in promoting strong trade policies that boost our economy and hopefully help to create jobs.
Well, John also referred to something. You know, we are both exporting and importing. We're both selling and buying, and so it's a two-way street. The United States is the second largest exporter in the entire world. About 15 years ago, we were number 1. So first of all, I think we can get back to being number 1. Number 1 right now is China. At one point, it was Germany. And there's no reason with the products, the innovation, the know-how we have that we can't be the number 1 exporter in the world. And the benefits to us would be enormous in terms of jobs and income. In terms of what the federal government does, Anja works at the State Department. At the State Department, we have embassies in 170, 180 countries. The ambassadors are focused on promoting U.S. sales. They will go with companies like Terex and Genie and a lot of small businesses to help find customers in those countries. They will work with government agencies, whether it's particularly in places like Africa and Southeast Asia, where governments have a much bigger role in terms of what's purchased. The Commerce Department plays an important role in that in terms of actually having people on the ground and in cities around the country to assist and guide companies. How do they do more exporting? I chaired the Export-Import Bank. Our role was in financing those U.S. exports. And perhaps the surprise is about 90% of the customers we worked with were small businesses. So we often hear about a Boeing or a GE or a Caterpillar or a Terex, but actually 90% of those companies are small businesses. So the federal government, when it's fully operational, and right now we're a little understaffed, the Export-Import Bank has really not been fully operational for 3 years now. It lacks a quorum. So that has sort of hampered its ability to be as full-throated in support of U.S. exports and U.S. jobs.
John, Anja, anything that came to your mind as Fred was talking?
Yeah, having been a U.S. government official, you realize that you need friends. You can't only have enemies. And I think one of the hardest things about trade policy now is that we've picked a fight with everyone simultaneously. I'll tell you in a little bit that, you know, China is cheating, and we need to push back pretty hard on the Chinese mercantilism. But we would do that much better if we were coordinating with Canada, with Europe, with Japan, and doing it as one team against China as the outlier, rather than picking fights with all of our friends at the same time.
John, I want to go back to something that you said earlier, too. When you talked about the tariffs that came in and then that increased cost for you, Terex, a big company, was able to withstand that. What is the impact like for smaller manufacturing businesses around the country?
Well, we were able to withstand it in the sense that we were able to pass some of the cost increases on, but not all, to our customers. So we did take a hit, if you will, of those increases. But as I said, we've got a great supply chain team that works hard, that knows lots of suppliers and vendors around the world. So we've been able to move some things. It takes time. A smaller manufacturer that doesn't have that staff, they're beholden to that supplier, and they're taking all of the impact. We've been able to offset some of the impact. Smaller companies that don't have the teams like we have, they're absorbing all of it. So it actually has a disproportionate impact on the smaller companies than it has on the larger companies, which I think goes against what the policy was that they tried to set out to anyway. So it's the inverse of what they were looking for.
All right, now we will turn it to you. If anybody has a question based on sort of our main talking point there and what Fred mentioned, we've got one right in the middle. Becky, everybody cheer for Becky. She is our microphone runner. She's doing great. How will she negotiate the monitor in the middle? She did just fine. If you could introduce yourself, tell us what you do, and ask your question.
Hi, I'm Jenny Snow-Boskalo, and I work here at Genie as the Senior Director of Customer Support and Business Planning. I was wondering, and really this is geared more towards you, I think, Fred, but what are some things that you think the current administration has done that's improved our trade positioning, and where do you see opportunities for improvement?
Well, I think one way it has is, frankly, it's put trade on the front page of the newspaper. So I think that there is a greater awareness of trade, a greater sense of how it impacts our economy, and I think that's been a positive thing. Though I would agree with Anja, if we want to bring countries like China more into line so it operates as other nations around the world are doing, we'd be far better off if we did that together with Japan, with Canada, with the EU, than trying to do it alone or picking fights with everybody. But I think the important thing is we've actually raised that issue, and people now have a better understanding about how trade is part of the conversation. It's part of the conversation at the dinner table, and I think that's a positive for our economy and our country.
Do you see any specific growth opportunities from that? I mean, that's a positive outlook of where things stand now. Sort of the next steps, do you see, okay, there are tangible things that can be done soon?
Well, I think we need to resolve the NAFTA issue and with Canada and Mexico, because that overhang, that uncertainty makes it hard. John was talking how companies are going to invest, where they make those decisions with all that uncertainty. So I think one thing we need to do, we've got to start wrapping these things up. And I'm concerned about this escalating trade war with China, because that just adds uncertainty, not just in our country and in China, but globally. When mom and dad are fighting, and we got the two largest economies in the world are fighting, it's not good for everybody else.
Right.
I would add just one point. I do think the Trump administration has done a good job getting China's attention, because yes. I think every previous administration, Clinton, Bush, Obama, we were very polite with the Chinese. And while I don't agree with a lot of the tactics that the Trump administration is using, I was in China a couple of weeks ago, and every Chinese official wanted to talk about how do we resolve this and what's going on. And I said, well, actually, it's not just about trade. It's about the fact that you guys are stealing our intellectual property. It's that you're not really opening your market to us and allowing us to sell on fair terms. You're not giving us licenses. So at least we've got China's attention. Now we need to find a real positive conclusion. And one more thing, I would add, you asked what positive things the administration's done. I think one of the harmful things they've done is said trade is to blame for the fact that a lot of people in this country are suffering, which is true. 85% of manufacturing jobs that have been lost in the past 15 years have actually been lost to automation, not to trade. So I think we need to have a broader discussion about that rather than just blaming it on trade and thinking that if we impose tariffs, all will be well.
Anja, I'm curious, a follow-up question to that. As you interact with officials in China and they're asking that question, how can we resolve this? And you mentioned it's not just about trade, it's also about intellectual property. What is the anecdotal response to that? Do they seem open to, okay, this might be something that we need to shift, or not so much?
Well, we're on the record here. The anecdotal response tends to be, oh, yes, we understand, and we want an equal playing field. But that's not how they act.
Sure.
I think one thing I would add is when we have brought cases to the World Trade Organization, which is sort of like a court to resolve trade disputes, we have generally prevailed, and China has complied. So we actually have mechanisms to make this work. There need to be improvements there, but frankly, working through the system, it may be a little slower. It's not a tweetable event, but we do get results.
Jen, the only other thing I'd say is, earlier in the year on that trade delegations, which we were fortunate to be a participant in, I think that helped to open some of the doors when President Trump went over. We were fortunate. I was fortunate enough to be part of that. And I think that was a good step to begin the dialogue, and then, we'll just see how this strategy plays out. But team, there's one thing that's absolutely certain. There is no good example in the history of the world where a trade war led to a positive outcome. There is no good example. So obviously we're hoping that cooler minds come to play, that we can resolve this in a positive direction.
Considering what's been said there, any questions that anybody would like to ask right now while you have access to our experts? If so, don't be shy. I'll give you that moment. Alrighty, very good stuff. Anja, as we mentioned earlier, you have your finger on the pulse of what's happening around the current trade policies that are being debated right now in Washington. I do want to talk with you a little bit about what you see, further articulating the biggest challenges to the future of trade and what that means for the United States. But what we also want to do is turn it back out to our friends here. Everybody have their clickers? Are you ready? Let's see if we can get another question up here on the screen. All righty, here we go. When you think about the future of trade in the United States, this is an easy one, option 1 or option 2. Is your outlook positive or negative? We'll put the timer on the clock. Already a lot of responses that are coming in here. Got about 9 seconds. Two seconds. All right, survey. Oh, here we go. All right, fairly split right here. We've got 44% who say positive, 2% who say negative. Now, we're not going to put up a right or wrong here. We're just going to let that stand right there. But pretty split right here in the room. That might be the case for those of you that are watching via the live stream as well. Anja, what do you see? This is a broad question, I know, but what do you see as the biggest challenges to the future of trade?
I'm sorry, I guess we've depressed you all with a negative attitude. The biggest challenges we face right now are, of course, NAFTA and China. We've talked a little bit about China already. Let me tell one story about NAFTA. On 9/11/2001, when we had a terrorist attack on the United States, we had to, for security reasons, shut our borders. Within 3 days, no one in America could make a car. The supply chains are just completely intertwined, as John and Fred have already talked about. And China, I'll give you one example just right here from Seattle. Boeing sells more than 1/4 of its commercial planes to that one country alone, just to China. So if that market is closed to us, that's tens of thousands of American jobs lost just from that one company and its suppliers. So these are two relationships that we absolutely have to get right. On NAFTA, we're making some decent progress, and I have never seen the country united as it has been, from union leaders to business organizations, to the Chamber of Commerce, to bipartisan members of Congress saying, you, Trump administration, don't have a choice. You have got to renegotiate NAFTA, but we have to come to a conclusion. So I'm quite hopeful that we will. Right now, we've reached a tentative deal with Mexico, although some details are still being ironed out. And we're trying to strong-arm Canada into accepting that deal. There are two big issues that the Canadians are still holding out on. One is, how do you actually handle these disputes when there are trade disputes happen? How do you make that easy or not? And another one is about their dairy farmers. But I have high hopes that on this one, we will get there. And boy, it's important, because we talked about 40 million jobs relying on trade. 14 million American jobs rely on NAFTA alone. So that's an important one to get right. On China, I've already been a little tough on them because they are cheating. And there are a lot of concerns we have there. What have we done? To date, the United States has slapped tariffs on about $250 billion worth of goods that we import from China. And so far, that hasn't hit the consumer. But when we were talking earlier about purchasing power and how that helps the American consumer, that's about to start happening, because these tariffs are now hitting all the products we buy regularly from China. China hasn't been shy. They have retaliated with tariffs of their own. But what they haven't done yet, and where I think we'll really see the trade war start, so to speak, is they haven't ratcheted up their nationalism, which is pretty common. They did this against the Japanese, where they just, they own all the media. It's an authoritarian regime. So they say, you won't buy American. And suddenly you've got nobody buying American goods in China. And they haven't yet gone extreme in the direction of saying, well, if you're an American company, you won't get this license, your merger won't go through, we're just going to do subtle things to make life difficult. So I think on the China side, things are going to get worse before they get better. And as I said before, with China, this really is a problem. We need to solve it, but we need to do it with our friends and allies, not against them. Thanks.
Fred, what would you add to that, considering your experience?
Well, I think what Anja said, I mean, we certainly have their attention, and the question is we have to focus on what we want as the outcome. If the outcome, you know, there's a lot of chatter about trade deficits, and the fact is it's actually not something we should be worrying about so much. You know, if you look at your iPhone, you know, they are assembled in China, and they are shipped to the United States from China. So, but the components come from the U.S., from Malaysia, from Korea, but China bears the full burden of that deficit. So when we say we want to reduce that trade deficit with China, first of all, that's not really the equation we should be working on. And secondly, China could very easily say, fine, we'll buy another $100 billion worth of goods from the U.S. and reduce the deficit. That will not solve the issues that Anja brought up in terms of theft of intellectual property, technology transfer, so that they would require companies like Terex and others to transfer some of the trade secrets you have. That won't solve that problem. So we really have to decide what do we want as an outcome, and I think that's not really clear right now.
All right, I turn to you now. Another opportunity to ask questions about this topic or about a previous topic that we have covered so far this morning. Get your hand up if you've got a question, and then Becky, our amazing mic runner, will get over to you. Oh, Becky. Unlucky Becky, all the way on the other side. You're getting your steps in. You should feel very productive. It's not even 10 o'clock yet locally. All right, if you could introduce yourself, tell us what you do here, and then ask your question.
Hi there, I'm Lynn Erskine. I work in finance here at Genie. My question is for Anja. Given your history working with Asia, where do you see growth opportunities for companies like us in the Asian markets?
Oh, that's a really good question. Thank you. So, you know, we're talking a lot about China being the bad guy. Actually, Asia is the biggest growth opportunity for our industry. Their economies are growing at 7-8% a year. By 2030, which is only 11 years away, 40% of the world's middle class is going to live in China and India versus 20% of the world's middle class in the US and Europe combined. So those are the markets of the future, and we're only going to thrive if we're able to sell into those markets, and vice versa, they'll be able to sell to us. So it's an enormous market opportunity for Genie, for Terex, and for so many companies around the country.
Yeah, and I'll weigh in on China because China is very important for us at Terex. And we actually have an incredibly successful business that's been growing tremendously, especially the Genie businesses, as many of you know, in our Changzhou facility. So we've grown that business for the dramatic growth in China, which has been very important to us. We export out of China, about 70% of what we produce here. We export around to Asia, to Europe. Very little actually do we import into the States out of our plant in China. So China is an incredibly important market for us today, and it's the law of large numbers for China and India. They're going to be incredibly important markets as we go forward. So it is incredibly important that we figure it out.
Can I add one point that we haven't really discussed here today? We just discussed it in passing, and that is that people in this country are struggling. Globalization hasn't actually worked for everyone. If you look around the country, if you are a white man who doesn't have a high school education, you live on average 10 years less than a white man with a college degree or more. That's completely unacceptable. And whether it's because of trade or whether it's because of automation, studies say it's more automation than trade, whatever the cause is, this is something we need to take incredibly seriously. Other countries, many of them in Europe, will spend up to 1% of their GDP working on upskilling people, retraining people, providing help when somebody is out of a job. The United States doesn't do enough of that. And I would say this is a bipartisan issue. This isn't a Republican or Democratic issue, and we should all not just say free trade is positive, and it is, but we need to help those people who have been left behind.
Anja, let me jump in there a little bit because, you know, one of the biggest challenges we face today, really across all of our U.S. operations, is skilled trades and skilled laborers, welders, assemblers, fitters. And so one of the things and so this is an issue for us. And so as we're growing jobs, we're running into a constraint in terms of skilled labor. And so we as an organization, AEM's working on it, but we talked about it here the last couple of days in our talent review. We have to own part of that. So some of the things we're doing is reaching out and establishing relationships with local high schools, local community colleges, doing, welding schools for each of our plants. And I think it has to be top down to some extent, but it also has to be bottoms up with companies like ourselves that take our own destiny in our hands and really establish those relationships. And I really think as a society, as you mentioned Germany, which is so true, they relish skilled trades. Not everybody needs to go to college. And we've set up a society that says everybody has to go to college to make a good living. No, you can make a great living, in skilled trades. And so that's something I think we have forgotten about that. I think we need to reorient ourselves around the need to train high-skilled people in the skilled trades such that they can have a great life, a great lifestyle without necessarily going to college. And and we're running into that. If you talk to my teams right now, at the top of their list is skilled labor. At the plants here, the plants in Moses Lake, Oklahoma City, you name the location, it is an issue that their team's done a great job managing it, but it's an issue for us.
I think we also have to realize our education doesn't end at age 20 or 22.
Yeah, thank you.
First of all, we always have to be increasing our education so you can do more things and do better things. And more of our work today is going to be so different in 5 years from now and 10 years from now. So if we're not continually finding ways to improve our skills, to learn more ways, we're not going to be as productive, and we get left behind. And I think we as a country didn't pay enough attention to that in the last 10, 15 years.
Absolutely. And Anja is absolutely right. This is not a partisan issue. This is an issue that we collectively, we being industry, government, need to come together and work to resolve. And it's solvable. This is not a problem that cannot be resolved.
I want to turn to the audience one more time because I've been in an audience before, and I know sometimes you have a question, but then you're like, geez, I'm not going to be the guy who's asking the question. One more opportunity to get your question answered. Okay, we've got one right in the back, maybe even two.
This is not a shy audience,
two here.
Trust me.
This is great. Becky, the mic runner, is making her way, and if you could introduce yourself to us, let us know what you do, and ask away.
Hi, I'm Lisa Edwards. I'm the Business Intelligence Manager here for the AWP division. And my question is to John Garrison and the rest of the panel on John Garrison's last statement about the skilled labor trades. Has AEM taken steps to work with organizations like MicroWorks, who does scholarships for the skilled trades?
For AEM, yes, there is a program underway with AEM specifically to us at Terex, specific to Genie. Yes, we have programs now where we're helping to defray the cost of like welding and welding schools, giving people the opportunities. And so we're reaching out to the local community colleges, local high schools, trades, and establishing, and the key for us is we have to establish personal relationships with those schools. And to be honest with you, I think Glenn's here, Moses Lake is really, from a best practice standpoint for us, they've done a really good job of reaching out and establishing those relationships and the training. And we take people that actually will have, people that are in the plant now that will encourage them to go to a welding or a welding school. We'll defray the cost of that so that they can come back into the skilled at a higher wage rate. So that's the type of activity that's ongoing. Do we need to do more? Yes, we do need to do more, but we are making projects. And Fred said, we all have to learn. Learning doesn't stop when you leave school. And for all of us, team, if we don't continue to learn, that's when you get left behind. And so it's up to us to provide those opportunities, but it's up to all of our team members. Invest in yourself. We'll help that so that we have the skill sets to win in a hyper-competitive global market.
Very good. Did we have one more question right back there? All right. Let us know who you are, what you do.
Hi, Jim Hanley. I work in health and safety here. My question is kind of Anja and Fred, given the trade complexities and how difficult it is sometimes to talk about that, what do you suggest we request of our elected officials? How can we speak to them about that for improving the situation?
Oh, that's such a good question. And it assumes that Congress is rational.
She used to be in government. Listen to her.
We used used to have a joke in DC that went, if the opposite of pro is con, the opposite of progress is Congress.
That's cold.
With apologies to the elected officials, I think all of us need to make sure we have a rational conversation about trade. I think it's really been hijacked. Yeah. And I think on the one side, people are saying, you're struggling, it's the fault of Mexico and Canada and China and all these unfair trade deals. That's not true. It's also not true that people aren't struggling. So I think what we need to request of our elected officials is to say, we're all in this together. It's one country. I don't care if you're Democrat and Republican or if you are doing something positive and it gives the other party a win. Let's just fix these problems because we all know what they are and they're fixable, as both of you said. I mean, you could have a skilling initiative. You could have an infrastructure initiative that would put lots of people to work. We haven't seen very much about that. And you could have a tax reform that actually helps balance the budget rather than putting a big hole in the budget. And I blame both parties equally here because I live in San Francisco. We are the heart of the resistance. And what I basically hear from my friends is, if Trump's doing it, it's wrong. And that's not the fair way to do things either. So I hope, sanity will prevail, and I hope that in November we'll all elect centrist moderates.
I would take something that both John and Anja said. One, if we can get members of Congress to realize, A, we're all in this together, and two, something John said, which is there's also personal responsibility. We all have to be responsible for what our path and our trajectory is going to be, and whether that's in terms of a moral life and whether it has to do with our economic life. So understanding we have a responsibility to ourselves and our family, and as a community, we're all in this together. I think there was a belief that was not true, that somehow the economy was growing fast enough, and if you lost your jobs due to trade, there'd be another job right down the street or across town. That wasn't the case. And we are facing, we've talked a little bit about it, automation, artificial intelligence is going to also be very disruptive to the workplace. And if we haven't thought through how do we help people get through that disruptive period, we're going to have a lot more churning in our economy based on where we're going in the next 5-10 years as we have had on trade.
We have just a few minutes left. In fact, I'm going to put you guys on the spot. You ready for this? John, since you worked out, you're going to start. We're going to do essentially, we're talking about trade. This is a big topic. We all know that it impacts us, but it can feel big. It can feel intimidating. As we even saw here, you can feel positive at times. You can feel negative at times. So having covered so much, what would you want those here with us and those watching on the live stream to walk away with? Their sort of the overwhelming thought about trade should be what today, John?
So just a couple things. One, I think it's an education. We all have to educate the importance of trade, and don't allow the trade to be hijacked by incorrect information. And that's part of what this is about, is the education. The other thing is, I'd say these issues are absolutely fixable. So I'm more to the optimist side than the negative side. But it does require all of us to have our voices be heard so that we can influence those members, elected officials, to work in a positive direction. So are there issues? Yes. But these issues are solvable. These are not insurmountable obstacles for us. But we do need to get after solving them, and that's what I would like people to take away. And remember, be an advocate of trade. Don't be anti-trade, because the anti-trade, that's a bad outcome. It's a very bad outcome.
Fred.
Well, I think that, one of the early slides you had up there in terms of how it has impacted our lives in a very positive way. One, in terms of reducing costs, but two, if you think about it, you used to hear a term seasonal fruits or seasonal vegetables. There are no seasonal fruits and vegetables. You can get strawberries in January. Last I checked, they don't grow bananas in the state of Washington, but you can have a banana with your cereal every single morning. And that is some of the things that we've benefited from trade that we kind of forget about. So food cost is lower, and the variety and the innovation we've seen is much broader.
Anja, the final word to you.
I would just summarize what I think has already been said. Trade is not the enemy. In fact, it benefits all of us. But we really do have problems, and we need to get to solving them on a bipartisan basis.
Very good stuff. Now I ask you one more question because, guys, we rented the clickers for the hour. Grab your clicker. Here's our final question. After everything you have heard today, what is the one action that you would be most likely to take to help spread the word about the importance of trade to your industry? We'll start the timer. Option 1 would be sign up at imakeamerica.org. Option 2, tell a friend. The third option is to write a social media post. You could also write a letter if you're old school like that, and we like that. And finally, contact Congress. Those are your options. Let's see how the room weighed in. There we go. Tell a friend. These are all good answers. Again, we grade on a curve. Everybody passes and you all get lunch. So way to go. All right answers there. I would encourage you all, everybody in the room, all of you who are watching via the live stream, do your part. Advocate for the policies that support your equipment manufacturing industry. If it's important to you, let your voice be heard. With that, we might give a round of applause to our fabulous panelists, and we'll bring Matt back up on stage. Come on up, Matt. Thanks, guys. After you.
All right, I want to thank the panelists. It was outstanding. It was great discussion, very educational. I know I learned a lot, and so really appreciate your insights on trade and trade policies, how they affect our industry, our company, our country, and our personal lives. Pretty informational, so thank you very much. Also, I want to thank AEM for bringing this event to Redmond, and as well as what you do for us day in and day out to support our industry. It's really important. Creating and maintaining strong trade agreements is just one of the many things, and one of the reasons that we work with you. The other things that they do is they're just a tremendous asset to our industry. They're helping us out improve the safety standards of our products. They're helping improve the standards of the overall products around the world. And they're representing our industry in a wide variety of public policy issues that we just don't have time and the contacts to do. So for those of you at AEM, we really appreciate it. And it's been a great event due to the professional approach that you've taken. So thanks so much. I would also be remiss not to thank the Terex team members who set this event up and worked with AEM to pull it off. Jennifer and Jolene, thank you so much. These kind of events take a lot of planning and hard work that none of us see, so we do recognize what it takes, and thanks. So, and finally, I want to thank everybody in the room and on the video stream for paying attention to this. It's really important that we pay close attention to the policies and the impact to our industry. So hopefully you walk out of here, feeling that you learned something, that you're more informed, that you're willing to talk with other people and act as you see appropriate. I think each and every one of us have learned a lot, and we really appreciate it. The AEM's website, imakeamerica.org, it's a great place for you to get the information. A lot of things were discussed today, but you can go there and get more information. And it's important that we're all informed and put a little bit of effort into learning more about it. So with that, we're going to conclude. I invite everybody to join us for breakfast. I saw that about half the bagels got eaten on the way in. So we do have bagels and coffee. Encourage you to mingle with the panelists and the AEM guests and each other. So with that, we'll conclude, and let's have that big applause. Thank you.